Hey guys, welcome back to Bits of Krish. Finally a peaceful morning at Bozena's hut. On a harrowing journey to Trosky, Henry and Hans found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Ruthless bandits had ambushed them, looted everything they had and left them battered and broken. Desperate for help, they stumbled upon Bozena's hut, where she and her daughter took them in, nursing their wounds with great care. Days passed and finally, one crisp morning, both Henry and Hans were fit, clean and ready to set off once more. They expressed their deepest gratitude to Bozena and her daughter before resuming their journey to meet von Bargow for a critical peace treaty. Yet a lingering question remains. Why were Bozena and her daughter living in isolation so far from village? The past holds many secrets and in time the truth will unfold. So stay tuned. After a grueling trek through endless meadows and quiet villages, they finally arrived at Castle Trosky. But the journey had stripped them of their noble presence. Their horses were gone, their once proud platoon had vanished. Instead of lords, they now resemble nothing more than vagabonds, clad in the tattered rags of thieves and grave diggers. The royal guards took one look at them and scoffed. Who would believe that this ragged mess of a man was Sir Hans Capon, the Lord of Lipa? Hans did everything he could to prove his identity, but in these chaotic times, his words sounded like a madman's rambling. The guards laughed, jeered, and adding insult to injury, drenched them with dirty puddle water before ordering them to leave at once. With no other options, the defeated duo trudged back to the village of Troskowitz, hoping to find another way forward. Exhausted and starving, they dragged themselves to the village tavern, hoping for a meal and a chance to clean up. But fate was not on their side. Reeking of sweat and misfortune, they were mistaken for beggars the moment they stepped inside. The tavern owner, unimpressed and unsympathetic, sneered at them. Money alone wasn't enough. If they wanted food, they would have to work for it. Only then would she serve them. What an unfortunate turn of events. But just when all hope seemed lost, a spark of opportunity flickered in the distance. Amidst the tavern's bustle, Henry spotted a familiar face. The very lady he had once defended by the lake when bandits had tormented her. If she recognized him, this could be their saving grace. Without wasting a second, Henry wiped his face, straightened up and approached her. Though he had freshened up, the stench of his misfortunes still clung to him like a shadow. To his shock, the woman barely looked at him before shaking her head. "I don't know you," she said firmly. Henry didn't have time for pleasantries. He cut straight to the point. "You were attacked by bandits," he said. "I was there. I helped you." But the woman's response was ice cold. She insisted that she had seen no bandit and certainly didn't recall ever meeting him. What a dilemma. Henry was stunned. He wasn't one to scheme or deceive. He had saved her life, and now she was turning her back on him. His frustration boiled over. How could she deny it? As she turned to leave, Henry grabbed her hand, demanding an answer. His voice was sharp, his patience gone. For a moment, she hesitated, then finally muttered something under her breath. Von Bargow is leaving soon for a wedding in Semin. That was it, their one chance. If they wanted to meet von Bargow, they needed to get into the wedding, and fast. At the tavern, Henry earned himself a bit of a reputation by agreeing to provide labor for the owner. A small gesture, but one that helped him stay in her good graces. While there, he inquired about any weddings happening nearby. The tavern keeper didn't hesitate. Why, it was the talk of the town. Everyone was abuzz about the grand wedding of Lord Semin Olda and Agnes, the daughter of Troskowitz bailiff. This wasn't just any wedding. It was a politically significant affair. Even von Bargow himself wished to attend, a move likely meant as a goodwill gesture. The event promised to be nothing short of a spectacle. But now came the real question. How were Henry and Hans supposed to get in? They had no invitation, no connections, and they could barely afford a decent meal, let alone entrance to a noble ceremony. Despite their grand ambitions, Henry had a more immediate task, lugging heavy sacks of paddy to Bozena's kitchen. The job was back-breaking and he wasn't about to do it alone. Turning to Hans, he asked for a hand, but as expected, Hans refused outright. Proud and self-important, Sir Hans Capon still carried himself like royalty, far too dignified for such menial task. Henry tried reasoning with him, explaining that nobody here knew them and that helping wouldn't tarnish his reputation. But his words fell on deaf ears. With a sigh, Henry resigned himself to the task, hoisting the sacks on his own. Meanwhile, Hans, never one to keep out of trouble, found himself in a heated argument with a local over recent bandit ambush. His sharp tongue and arrogant demeanor quickly escalated the situation. He pushed, taunted and agitated irritated the man until things inevitably boiled over. A squabble turned into a full-blown brawl. Henry stepped in, trying to defuse the situation, but it was no use. The first punches had already been thrown. Shoves turned into swings. Before they knew it, Henry was in the thick of the fight, launching a punch of his own. The villagers weren't about to let two outsiders rock them up without retaliation. One after another, they closed in, fists flying, legs kicking, an all-out beatdown. Henry, a trained fighter, dodged and blocked the blows with skill, striking back only when absolutely necessary. He wasn't here to hurt anyone, just to protect himself and Hans. But the brawl raged on for a good minute or two, drawing the attention of the royal guards. The guards stormed in, shouting for order, trying to break up the chaos. But Hans, hot-headed and oblivious, landed yet another punch, this time on one of the guards, a mistake that surely would come with severe consequences. As a result, Hans and Henry were stripped of their clothes and shamed atop a platform, their heads locked in a wooden pillory, restricting their movements. Positioned at the very heart of the village, they were put on a display for the amusement and ridicule of the townsfolk. To the villagers, they were nothing more than lowly troublemakers, worthless fools who deserved their humiliation. Though it was Hans who had instigated the fight, he stubbornly blamed Henry for the entire fiasco. Henry, ever the straightforward one, finally snapped. He exploded in frustration, making it clear that Hans was the only one responsible for dragging them into this mess. They were supposed to keep a low profile, earn their way to the wedding, that was the deal. Instead, they stood like fools, bickering like children. As dawn broke and they were finally about to be released, they spotted von Bargow and his men riding past. Hans, driven by sheer desperation, shouted with all his might, relentlessly calling out his name. But it was in vain. No one paid them any heed. In the eyes of the world, they were now nothing more than beggars, a pair of no-good drifters with nowhere to go. The moment they were freed, Hans stormed off. He had no intention of sticking with Henry any longer. Henry, ever the more rational of the two, tried to stop him, knowing full well that Hans needed someone to rein in his temper. But did Hans care? Not in the slightest. Without a second thought, he took off in pursuit of von Bargow. Henry, on the other hand, remained calm and resolute. He had his own priorities. First, he needed to secure an invitation to the wedding. But to do that, he needed food, clothes, money. And above all, he had to rebuild his shattered reputation among the villagers. A beggar from the village, showing a rare moment of sympathy, offered him a few coins and shared information on where he could find food and shelter. But Henry had another concern, his loyal dog, Mutt, who had gone missing in the chaos. And then there was a matter of a horse. Traveling on foot wouldn't get him far. The beggar mentioned a place in Semin where she knew a horse seller. But there was one glaring problem. Horses were expensive and Henry was flat broke. His situation couldn't possibly be worse. Now the real challenge begins. How will Henry survive in such dire circumstances? How will he manage to acquire an invitation to Semin's wedding? What do you think? Did Henry obtain the invitation through honor, or did he take a darker path? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have made this far in the video, don't forget to hit that like button. We'll meet again in another adventure. Until then, ciao ciao.